Hey Max, let's talk history of music. First of all, definition. What is music? Music in the most basic, simple terms is just noise. It's just sound over time. It can be tin cans banging together. It can be violins. It can be something as simple as that's all music. Your voice, it's music. History of music. Music has always been very socially significant. Music has always been very politically significant. People work out really hard to music. People go to sleep to music. Music drives emotion, drives relationships, drives a lot. Sometimes good, sometimes illegal. So if you look at, let's go back to 17th century and even 16th century music. You basically at that time, 15th, 16th century music, it was composed primarily of Gregorian chants. One thing about it is what instrument was invented at the time, and if you'll notice throughout history, the music changes based on the technology. So if you have something interesting, new keyboards come out, great, ELO makes a new album, Discovery, great album. Have your parents play it for you. A new bass comes out. What does Paul McCartney do? He makes a new song. That's just happened throughout all of history. So if you're thinking piano, which is what we're mostly talking about, piano wasn't even a 17th century instrument. So anything that would have been back there, 17th century is basically the 1600s. Piano didn't exist. So you had a harpsichord. So things are going to be very different. They're going to be less sustained because they didn't even have a sustain pedal. A piano is actually a pianoforte, so it's a soft loud. It makes things loud, it makes things soft, as opposed to a harpsichord, which made things kind of generically homogeneous. So no sustain pedal and no tonal definition in dynamics. So it wasn't a soft loud. It was just blah. Now, harpsichord's not really a blah instrument. It's just blah, in my opinion, compared to the piano. So if you go back to the Gregorian chants, what's going on and who are those made for? They're made primarily for the church. Most music, 16th, 17th, 18th century, a little bit even less so today, but very, very, very much less, was for one of two purposes, either the church or the court. So kings listen to it and church people listen to it. If you look at the number of people, relatively speaking, that even had access to music, it was very, very, very small. And part of that, again, is the technology. People didn't have any way to record music, so you couldn't record something and then play it back later. You had to listen to it live. Some of the most prolific composers, let's start our modern, very loose term, music with Johann Sebastian Bach. So Johann Sebastian Bach, probably the most prolific composer the world has ever known. Best is a subjective term. Some people say Mozart's best, some people say Beethoven, some people say Bach, yada yada. And there's a lot of Bachs too. Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach, Johann Sebastian Bach. Right now we're going to talk Johann Sebastian Bach. Johann Sebastian Bach, basically the heart of Baroque music. So we're going to break the music down of the classical genre into four periods, really five if you go with pre-Baroque. So those are the chants. And there's also another little interesting bit of music that goes on in that period too, which is gypsy music. Gypsy music tells stories, just entertain. That's really the way stories were told, because we, again, didn't have any way to set up your iPhone and record a video and pass it on to Facebook. Didn't exist. So we're doing lectures. Hi, Hilda. I'm doing a lecture for Max on history of music. You look very nice. Oh, wow, that just distracted me. Okay, Max, ignore everything that just happened in the last 10 seconds. So Bach, Baroque. I'll show you a few examples of different types of music in the next few minutes on how Baroque compares to the next period of classical music, which is called the classical period. The Baroque period, you have Johann Sebastian Bach, you have Handel, you have Gluck. You move into the classical period of classical music. Now, you can still make classical music today. It's not that classical was one particular date range. It's more of a style, and then there's an era within that style by the same name. Gets a tiny bit confusing. Most prolific composers in the classical era would have been Mozart, Beethoven, and Carl Maria von Weber, German composers. That's very common. You get into the Russian composers, Tchaikovsky. The next era really emphasizes a lot of the French composers. Debussy, Claude Debussy was in the Romantic era, and you'll feel, I'll play two examples, one from the Romantic era, one from the Baroque era, and you'll definitely feel the difference in the era. Then you get into the modern era, and that's the modern era of classical music, maybe of Rachmaninoff. Then you even get into the American composers, Gershwin, for example, and then you get into even more. So let's now get into the 20th century and even 21st century, 20th century of music. And what did we change in music? Well, music in the 20th century was all about that bass, And actually, you think I'm quoting a song, I am. But in the Baroque period, and even pre-Baroque, the church dictated that you are not allowed to write music that made your lower half move. So while today it might be all about that bass, back then it was not about that bass at all. That was very illegal. It would have, some of these things politically, musicians, and authors too, but musicians could lose their head, literally, if they wrote music. And now sometimes people did, they wrote very political music. And take jabs at the king or something. And you had to be very careful on how you did that, otherwise you would literally die. Not so much today. You can write anything you want. And at least in America, nobody's going to kill you because you wrote a song that didn't like the president. Happens all the time. So now look at the modern era, what happened, and not modern within the classical era, but modern as in 20th century or 21st century music. But what changed around then? Well, one, electricity. So now we have electricity, we're able to come up with different sounds, and we're able to record those sounds and play them back. So now the music is available to not just thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, but millions, hundreds of millions, billions of people. And you don't have to sit around a campfire and chant or sing to tell stories. You can record them and play them back, and that whole modern era of music with respect to technology, electricity. So you can thank Tesla for your favorite recording because he's Mr. Electricity. So let's get you to a couple of examples of Baroque versus Romantic music in just a second. And we'll check out of that now and check back in to discuss more 20th century music later.